Good evening from Pretoria, where the Oscar Pistorius trial has started hearing a second week of witness testimony. In court today, Pistorius was repeatedly sick as he listened to graphic details of the injuries sustained by his girlfriend, Reeva Steenkamp. Pistorius says he thought she was an intruder hiding behind his locked toilet door. Cameras were not allowed to broadcast the evidence of the pathologist who carried out the autopsy because of its detailed and explicit nature. Earlier, Pistorius' defence team questioned a security guard about the night of the shooting. Paul Harrison reports.
After a weekend away from the cameras, Oscar Pistorius arrived back at the Pretoria courthouse, briefly acknowledging those positioned outside.
Morning, Oscar. Morning.
And those filming inside. Ready for a second week of evidence, the Olympian, focused and from time to time making his own notes, listened to his lawyer argue it was he who phoned security on the night of the shooting, not the other way round.
What I say to you that I put proof before you that in fact Mr. Pistorius phoned first and you returned that call very shortly.
Dis hoe ek uitgevind het dat iets fout is by meneer Pistorius huis.
Upon my arrival at Mr. Pistorius' house, I'm the first person who called him, and that's how I learned to know that something was wrong.
And I say that call was made before your arrival, before you arrived.
Daar is iets fout by meneer Pistorius huis.
If Mr. Pistorius was the one who called me first, then I would have known that something was wrong at his house.
And what I put to you, it would make sense, Mr. Barber, that if Mr. Pistorius phoned you and he was crying on the other side, that you would phone him back to find out if he was okay. That would just make sense.
My lady, I called Mr. Pistorius.
En meneer Pistorius het vir my gesê, everything is fine.
And Mr. Pistorius told me that everything is fine.
Maar ek het agtergekom meneer Pistorius huil.
But I realized that Mr. Pistorius is crying.
En voor ek nog kan gepraat het verder, het die foon afgegaan tussen ons.
And before I could speak further, that's when the line went dead.
Security guard Peter Baba is so far one of the few witnesses happy to appear on camera during this trial. And while others have chosen not to give evidence on camera, the audio of their testimony has always been made available, until now. The reason? The expected, explicitly graphic evidence from the man who performed the autopsy on victim Reeva Steenkamp.
My lady, the professor will give evidence, and he feels that due to the explicit and graphic nature of the injuries and what he found, that should not be sent into the whole world. It's not, my lady, as I understand it, a question of press freedom or freedom of expression, but more as far as the respect and dignity of the body of the deceased is concerned, my lady, the rights of the family and friends of the deceased.
And after a brief adjournment, partly to allow a lawyer acting on behalf of the broadcast media to arrive at court, pathologist Gert Seeman, head of forensic medicine at the University of Pretoria, gave his 3 key reasons against the live broadcasting of his testimony.
Number one, I think that the very personal nature of findings that are made at an autopsy examination, as well as the very graphic details pertaining to some of the injuries and wounds which may be described, have the potential to compromise the dignity of the deceased. And although she may not have rights in the technical sense, I believe that it is my duty and our duty to protect or to preserve the dignity of the deceased as well. Number two, I believe that by such public and contemporaneous streaming of information of this nature, it is almost inevitable that we will impinge upon or harm the rights of remaining relatives and friends of the deceased. And number three, I think that it goes against the good morals of society for us to make information of this nature available in a manner where vulnerable or unsuspecting people out there, so to speak, may be exposed to information in a manner which could do harm. I speak of children, I speak of any person who may be vulnerable to this kind of information if they were not timelessly warned thereof. And so I think in time such information could and probably would be made available, but then hopefully it would have been filtered or paraphrased to some extent, and people would be given the opportunity to disengage or not to listen thereto if they so choose.
Judge Masipa then heard arguments from lawyer Nick Ferreira on behalf of the broadcast media. He presented a compromise which broadcasters believed would accommodate all parties, including the family of Reeva Steenkamp.
Rather than a live feed, we propose that the broadcast media be permitted to record the evidence, and after the evidence has been led, that a summarized version of this witness's evidence, to the extent that any of that evidence may permissibly be broadcast, be compiled by the broadcast media, and they're happy to do so in cooperation with the witness himself, in cooperation with the legal teams for the defence and the prosecution, in order to ensure, and even with your ladyship, should your ladyship be so inclined, to ensure that none of the evidence which is ultimately broadcast at a later stage is of such a nature that it raises the issues of sensitivity that the witness has raised. That approach accommodates all of the concerns which have been raised by the witness. It accommodates any possibility of infringement of dignity of the deceased or of any kind of trial-related prejudice that may accrue as a result of the broadcast. And moreover, it has the advantage of being a far less restrictive approach insofar as the media's right to freedom of expression is concerned and insofar as the principle of open justice is concerned.
The prosecution seemed open to a degree to the media's compromise of approved segments of the pathologist's testimony being televised, but it was greeted with stiff opposition from Oscar Pistorius' legal team.
I submit with respect that the evidence of Professor Simon must make it apparent that there is good reason why he makes the objection that he does. It is to protect that dignity. When he refers to his patient, ultimately, her dignity. We cannot simply choose to ignore the dignity of the deceased and her family by allowing the graphic nature of that proposed evidence to be broadcast without limitation. There was a suggestion made that that agreement be reached by mutual consent between the parties, and that your ladyship then be approached in chambers. I'm opposed to that approach, because that's not what these proceedings are about. Then I submit that at this point in time, the objection by Professor Simon should enjoy preference, and that any form of broadcast of his evidence, particularly by virtue of what he has stated, the nature of the evidence will be, not be broadcast.
Well, let's explore that issue a little more with our resident legal expert, Llewellyn Kerr-Lewis. For a week, we've had this historic live broadcast from court. Suddenly today, the judge has pulled the switch. What did you make of it today?
Well, Martin, it was an interesting debate that featured in court this morning. The ruling by the judge suddenly came as a bit of a surprise to all of us, indicating that suddenly we are not allowed to listen to the testimony of an expert, purely because it's of a sensitive nature. Now, besides the fact that I think the ruling might be a bit of a concern and even a bit vague in large, obviously these kind of cases are supposed to be sensitive and supposed to be of a sensitive nature and even a grim nature. And if that's the only reason for not allowing the media and the public out there to listen and see what's going on in court, that can't be right.
But this is uncharted territory, isn't it, for South African courts? And one of his concerns was that young kids, vulnerable people might be watching and might switch on with absolutely no warning. Didn't he have a point?
Obviously, it's a balancing act that must be attended to here. But also take into consideration, and I think that should never be underestimated, is the maturity and the integrity of the media at large. One would expect for the media to also be sensitive in their reporting, and from what I've gathered and seen the last couple of weeks, besides the fact that it's a media frenzy, to a certain extent everything was quite in place. Nothing to such an extremity that it's unsensitive. And maybe, just maybe, she should have given the media the benefit of the doubt.
You think the judiciary should treat us, the media, a bit better?
I would like that. I would like to see that happen. We have constitutional principles, obviously, to adhere to. But not only that, already we have given the green light to proceed with the media being in attendance in court and out there at the outside of the building, etc., to now suddenly go back, because that's precisely what's happening here. It's a step back instead of a step maybe in the right direction.
Thank you, Llewellyn. After the break, we'll be looking more closely at the pathologist's evidence from the post-mortem examination he carried out on Reeva Steenkamp's body. Welcome back. In court today, a key difference emerged between the pathologist's evidence and Pistorius' own account of the evening. Joining me now to discuss it are our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, and ballistics expert, Terns Britt. Thank you both for joining us. Well, one of the most important points Professor Simon brought from the post-mortem examination of Reeva's body was about when she could have eaten. He said it wasn't an exact science, but estimates she ate her last meal 2 hours before her death. Pistorius maintains, though, that they both went to bed at 10 p.m, but the shooting happened at 3 a.m. in the morning, which suggests she would have eaten around 1 o'clock. Alex, why is this evidence so important, the analysis of the stomach contents?
Well, Professor Simon went to great lengths to add 1,000 different caveats as to his conclusion. But the key part of his evidence was that he was basically contradicting what Oscar Pistorius has already told the court. Oscar Pistorius said that the two of them had a very quiet night in. They were in a loving relationship. Reeva Steenkamp had been doing her yoga exercises. He'd been watching television. And then they turned in quite early that night, then gone to bed at about 10 o'clock on the eve of Valentine's Day. Now, if it emerges, as Professor Simon is saying, that she had a meal 2 hours before she died, so in the very early hours of Valentine's Day, then that would utterly contradict what the athlete had been saying to the court.
And I guess it's something that, under cross-examination, the professor will be tackled about.
I'm sure the professor will be tackled about this, as he himself said, it's not an exact science, and he went on to describe the breakdown of different types of food and the length of time it took for that type of food to break down, and of course there isn't anything that says that she didn't get up and have a snack, as one of the reporters mentioned. So we'll hear in due time what the defence's answer to that is, but at the moment it certainly appears to contradict the athlete's version of events.
Professor Simon dealt with the type of ammunition used by Pistorius that night. He said the bullets were of a type known as Black Talon or Ranger SXT. The bullets have a hollow point which expands on impact, causing maximum damage, causing some countries to ban the sale of these bullets. This video shows the bullet's explosive nature. When it hits its target, it breaks into small pieces of sharp, jagged shrapnel that tear through what's in its path. Terns, tell us more about these bullets.
The Black Talon was manufactured in early 1991 by Winchester, US-based ammunition factory. In the US, originally it was only available to law enforcement agencies. However, in South Africa, you can, if you have a license for that particular type of ammunition, you can buy them. And they were used, or they were discontinued in 2000. They were again released in 2007 as SXTs, and in 2009 they released a newer version called the PDX1, which is currently still available.
But they sound pretty devastating. Why would somebody like Oscar Pistorius, or anybody indeed, have bullets like that in their guns?
The main purpose of a hollow point bullet is the bullet has, when it's fired, it has kinetic energy, and that's what caused the damage. If you take, for instance, a stone, you throw it into a pond, the ripple effect that you get on the pond, that's the kinetic energy transferred onto the target. The idea of a hollow point is to, as soon as it hits the target, open up and stop, so more energy can be transferred. And one will find with a hollow point type bullet that, although, say for instance, the bullet hits in the body, organs like the liver and the heart are also damaged, although not struck by the bullet, but because of this transfer of energy, cause damage to the liver and to the other organs.
But if the bullet had already gone through a wooden door, what effect would that have when it hits a body?
That will depend on the thickness of the door, the type of door. If it's a thin door, not much effect. But as soon as it hits a solid target, it will start expanding. And this particular bullet is constructed. It will open up and it will form 6 hooks around the side of the bullet to actually hook onto the target and bring it to a stop as soon as possible, so as much of the energy as possible can be transferred.
Professor Simon detailed how there were 3 bullet wounds to Reeva Steenkamp's body. The fatal wound is likely to have been the bullet to the right side of her head. There were also wounds to her arm and right hip, and there were wooden splinters consistent with bullets being fired through a door. Are those a sort of wounds you would have expected?
If the bullet went through the door, I would presume that it wasn't quite a thick door. It sounds to me like a thin type of wood door, and then the bullet will still have enough energy to cause quite damage when hitting a body or a target. As to if the evidence is that wood splinters were found in the body, it means that she should have been close to the door, because wood splinters is light, they won't travel that far, and if it enters the body, it's an indication that she was close to the door when these bullets went through the door.
Alex, it was pretty grim evidence, wasn't it, as we had anticipated. What effect did all this have on Oscar Pistorius?
Well, I think the athlete was well aware of what was in the evidence, because even before the pathologist started outlining these very graphic descriptions, he was already beginning to sob, dissolve into tears, put his hands over his ears as if to try and block out what was about to come, and he started retching. As soon as the pathologist started going into this very detailed explanation, and also very clinical explanation, he was very cool and calm, he was doing his job, but he detailed everything down to a 1 millimeter scratch somewhere. Everything was detailed, and some of it was very, very difficult listening to. The athlete himself obviously found it very, very difficult. He repeatedly retched and vomited. A bucket was provided for him by the court official, and he continued to vomit throughout the entire description. Very upsetting for members of his family. His sister Amy was crying. His brother was visibly very upset.
And the
Steenkamp family also found it. Not direct family members, but very close family friends were finding it very difficult to listen to. There was some very graphic evidence. For instance, one of the bullets which entered her right hip shattered so violently that the pathologist said he couldn't actually recover all the shrapnel fragments.
It makes you wonder why Mr. Pistorius was putting himself through this, because he doesn't have to be there.
My understanding was that there had to be absolute exceptional circumstances for him to actually leave the court. When he returned from the lunch recess, he did keep his coat on. So I think there possibly was an option that if he became so violently ill that he could have left. Certainly the judge interrupted proceedings in the morning to ask if he was all right, and his lawyer, Barry Rue, made the point that he certainly wasn't all right. He was very unwell, but this wasn't going to change. He was, I suppose, in some ways prepared for it. Certainly he did not stop retching and vomiting throughout the entire description.
None of this, of course, was broadcast live. It's the first interruption to this historic live stream of evidence. What did you make of that court ban? This was argued by the pathologist who thought the evidence was going to be too grim, but it has made a big change to coverage of this story today.
The whole case is a legal precedent in South Africa. They've never before had live streaming of a criminal case, so everyone is slightly feeling their way. I think possibly it was the correct decision not to have live audio of very, very graphic and grisly details during the daytime when children could have been listening, or those of a sensitive nature might have been listening. However, I think the judge was quite unclear about exactly what we could report, and I think if you are interested in freedom of the media and freedom of the press, then journalists should have been allowed to report a summary, a contemporaneous summary of what was going on, and that was unclear, although later on she clarified that journalists could go about their work and report on it, which we did.
How far do you think this might undermine the kudos that the South African judiciary has gained in allowing the live broadcast up to this point?
Well, there certainly was quite a strong reaction on social media about the judge's decision to restrict the reporting. However, would it damage the kudos? I don't think so. I think South Africa is really setting a precedent. They're feeling their way. Everyone realises everyone is feeling their way. Lawyers, the judge, reporters, everyone is. I think they should be applauded for taking this quite courageous decision.
Do either of you expect Mr. Pistorius to be there tomorrow after what he's gone through today?
Well, he has to be there, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if he wasn't there, because apart from anything else, I think all the Pistorius family and friends want to hear what's going on, and certainly, although it's very, very clearly very, very uncomfortable listening for him and for all of those who are associated with the people involved, I think there's a desire that this is part of the process and it's a means to an end.
And the pathologist is still in the witness box tomorrow, so there's more of this to come.
The pathologist is yet to not only finish his evidence, but has yet to be cross-examined by the defence. So there's going to be a lot more detail and a close questioning and examination, for instance, of his assessment of the food that was left in Reeva Steenkamp's stomach.
Alex Turns, thank you very much. Professor Simon will continue giving evidence tomorrow morning, as you've just heard, and no doubt will face careful cross-examination from Defence Counsel Barry Roux. But that's it for today. But remember, you can watch continuing coverage of the Pistorius trial on Sky News at 7:30 in the morning and a special programme at 9:30.